Bill River, je suis le président de la Fédération internationale des traducteurs de l'Amérique du Nord et aussi directeur général du Conseil national et conjoint sur les langues à Washington, D.C. Je vais introduire Lilia en quelques minutes. Je voudrais remercier encore une fois Diane Cusineau et son équipe ici à Outiac pour l'hospitalité, pour toute l'assistance et l'aide pour cette symposium. Je remercie encore Alex Diabo et Dimitri Neoenkoa. Thank you very much to Alex Diabo. Il y a ici les représentants de l'Association américaine des traducteurs, Elena Langdon, qui est interprète et traductrice portugaise anglaise, qui travaille aussi à London et à l'Université de Massachusetts. Et bien sûr, Donald Baribé, qui représente le Diacre et notre secrétaire général. Je pense que c'est le titre exact pour Léa Paquette, qui beaucoup ici connaît. Et qu'est-ce que c'est le FIT? Le FIT, c'est une fédération internationale des traducteurs, des organisations de traducteurs. Il y a une centaine, je dis une centaine d'organisations nationales et régionales des traducteurs et interprètes. Et le FIT de l'Amérique du Nord se comprise l'OTIAC, la ATA et le Colegio Mexicano de Interpretes de Conferencias. Je m'excuse, je ne parle pas l'espagnol. Je continuer en anglais, and I would like now to introduce Odelia Romero, who is our very distinguished speaker from Southern California right now, but originally from Mexico, and is with many of our, much of our population in the United States. As in Canada, we are a nation of immigrants, and that brings us great strength and diversity, but also brings challenges to our system. Odelia is a distinguished Zapotec English interpreter and interpreter trainer and language activist who has spent a career now building the community in the United States and providing language access to the Zapotec speakers in the United States. So I'd like to, no further ado, bring Odelia up, and after is our next intervener.
Padiush Juskrende Bajirenga, Venecina, Venestedisha, Panetsu, Lavausesu, Vene. Good afternoon, or good morning, colleagues who write the word that has been written and rewrite it, and who transmit the sacred language. In other words, colleague interpreters. So I want to start with that because that's how complex our language is. It's not a simple interpreter, but it's actually the person that transmits a secret word. And that makes it very challenging to speak so beautifully because not everything really speaks so beautifully, right? So I'm going to start a little bit. I was born in the highlands of northern highlands of Oaxaca in southern Mexico. I was forced to come to the U.S. in 1980 because my parents had been here in the mid-70s, and then they sent for me. They didn't ask me if I wanted to come to the U.S. And when I came to the U.S., I only spoke Zapotec. I did not speak English or Spanish. So it was very challenging to, I guess, interact with the Mexicans because I didn't know they were Mexicans. And at first I knew I was a woman from Sogocho. My family was from Sogocho. My ancestors were from Sogocho. We spoke the same language. We ate the same food. And suddenly I come to downtown LA, ugly buildings. I learned to love them. But they were ugly. They were very ugly too. There was no rivers. My clan is called the people of the river. And suddenly I am called Odelia Romero. I'm forced to speak Spanish. People are asking me, are you Mexican? I would say, yeah, sure, I'll be Mexican. Latino, Hispanic. And then at this point of age, I said, you call me whatever makes you happy. I am a woman from Soch. And I speak the Zapotec language. And I became an interpreter I wasn't planning to be an interpreter, but I was the first kids to learn, according to my parents, English. And the first interpretation I had was from my parents after being bullied by other Mexicans. I grabbed a stapler and hit someone on the head. And I got suspended for a whole week. So when they called me into the principal's office, I told my parents they had given me vacations for being such a good student. So that's how I started becoming an interpreter. And then the community started saying, hey, can you help me fill out these paperwork? Can you do this? Can you do that? But for many years, for over 20 years, I didn't know it paid. Really. I know, right? So I'd like to start with a little personal story, like how I became an interpreter and why is this so important to me. And I want to start with this quote, in colonial conquest, language did to the mind what the sword did to the bodies of the colonized. And this is one of my favorite authors on language, on the resistance of language and the colonization of language, right? And I'm going to start with all the numbers and everything. According to the Mexican Foreign Affairs, as of 2 weeks ago, there are 2 million indigenous people in the U.S. from Mexico. I mean, it's not from a trustworthy source, but that's what they said. Mainly from Oaxaca and Guerrero, my state. And we think it's a little bit more, because in my case, my entire community is in LA. There are more than 2,000 of us in South Central Los Angeles, just my community, not counting all the other communities, neighboring towns and villages. So we don't have an exact number, again, because we fall under Latinos, or in the case of Mexico, we fall under Mexicans, and nobody asks us if we identify any other way. And, at this point, everybody's like, oh, sure, Latino, whatever, So that's kind of the issue we're having, to get real numbers of our existence as indigenous people. And as an organization, we call that like a genocide to statistic, because if we don't exist in numbers, then we don't exist, right? So that's one of the things that we do. And the other group also in the US is the Guatemalan indigenous people. We have the highest population, and we have a current crisis. I mean, the US is facing a crisis of indigenous people coming in. And as you've seen, number 45 talks about all these Mexicans coming in, but the poor thing cannot differentiate between natives from Guatemala, from Mexico. He thinks we all outside of the border are Mexicans. So this is a report that you could get a copy of it. It's very detailed of the languages that are being found at the border currently, done by the USC San Diego. And we just had a meeting the day before, and we talked about these challenges of all these languages from south of the border are not getting an interpreter. All the communities, all the kids that are detained at the border, all the families, most of them are not having an interpreter in their language from both Mexico and Guatemala. And you could see there's other, and this is just from the San Diego border, from one university, and the people that were able to identify that they speak in indigenous languages. So we're not talking about the Arizona border, the Texas border. So these are, I mean, it's a very small report, but that's currently what we have. As an organization, currently we're working with UCLA to create more numbers and reports on the issues at the border, especially the California border, because again, everybody talks about the Texas-Arizona border, but there's also a crisis on the California border. So.
Is the size according to number?
No.
Okay.
But you could get the report. And then also, this is the reports that we got from the Customs and Border, and most of them, they were not able to meet the needs of indigenous people at their detention center. This is from ICE and CBP. These are, and again, these are numbers that are very, they're limited because not everybody identifies. So if you ask my mother, are you indigenous? She will know. Because as far, and I'll have to tell you a story, like one time I was giving an interview on TV and she saw me, and then afterwards she called me, she's like, what is wrong with you? And I said, Mom, why? She's like, how can you not know you're a woman from Sogocho? What is this identity thing you're talking about? Don't you know? Did we not teach you where your roots come from? What do you mean? She was really confused by this discourse of being indigenous and a lot of people not knowing what our name, like the word indigenous. And she's like, why do you all go to school? The more time you spend at school, the more you get. How can you not know where you come from, you know? So that's my mom has. So these are like the real numbers, and these are for us. This is a crisis because we're talking about thousands of lives, of people, of families being separated, being put in this detention center, kids given in adoption because of a language barrier. I mean, this is very tragic, and I'll talk about the very few documented cases of Cirila Baltazar, who gave birth to a baby girl in Mississippi, and the Spanish-English interpreter did not know she spoke an indigenous language, so she assumed that Cirila, she was sharing a room with someone, that she was exchanging housing for sex. So they removed the baby. The baby was given in adoption to a white couple, friends of the judge and the social workers. You could read more on the case, and the mom was deported to Mexico. But the baby, she recuperated the baby after a few years, but imagine being separated from your child because of a language barrier, right? No one knew that she spoke another language. And the NPR has this very interesting story because, well, I say interesting because they did a story on a child that was also removed by the parents because of lack of language access, because they didn't have I don't know how exactly it happened because, again, NPR goes and interviews the mother again, but never gave her an interpreter for a second time. So when she has the opportunity to retell the story, you know, our allies, our Mexican allies or Latino allies, they just figure like by speaking slower, this person would understand and will be able to retell their story. But that didn't happen. So just that, listen to that. So I just wanted to illustrate some cases. And now so these are like the many cases, you know, we're documenting as many as possible. In December, we'll have our first, we will present one of our first research done by the UNAM on how many indigenous Mexicans were dealing with the judicial system without an interpreter or without a trained interpreter. And so we will do a Zoom transmission on it. So if you follow us on social media, you'll find out about the results that we're going to share in our second annual Indigenous Interpreting Conference. And one of the things I think was mentioned by, what was the first presenter? Mrs. Sige, is that because we're living in two different worldviews, having access to an Indigenous interpreter is very difficult and a trained one. And then just like I started with, an interpreter, an interprete is very easy. But the person that transmits the word, if they don't know how to break that down or how to think of how to say interpreter, then they will borrow from Spanish. And currently what we're having right now is a lot of borrowing from Spanish. So one of the judges told me the other day, excuse me again, but 90% of what this person is interpreting is in Spanish. So he asked me to go and to the hearing, and yes, and I asked the interpreter, where did you get trained? Or like an agency called me, they sent me here, and that's the other problem we're finding, that agencies are sending anyone without the proper training, and actually they're showing up in very populated indigenous neighborhoods, and they're like, you want to become an interpreter, we'll pay you $30 an hour, $20 an hour. So of course, when you offer a person that kind of a salary, then they're going to say yes. But more than doing good, they're mostly causing the harm, because you have to know that our judicial system in Mexico is different than the US. But our way of doing justice in our community is very different. So that person has to be able to transmit that message. How would I say judge for my community to understand that this is a serious, like, how do you say judge? Like, this is serious. Who would I relate it to back home in the way of doing system back home? And most of us don't know that. We don't know that unless we go to school. How does the US system work? How does the medical system work? And how does the school system work, right? So we're being sent out there. And I was one of those kids that was sent out there to do interpreting and not knowing what I was doing. And I didn't do it out of malice. I was doing it to help my community, because these agencies will help, can you help? And we would run to help, and really we did not know if ethics. And we don't know the code of ethics. I use this one. So, we're not abiding by the code of ethics, right? So why? Because in California, we don't have a code of ethics in Spanish. Most of our interpreters are bilingual. Very few are trilingual like myself. And have gone to school for interpreting is very few of us. There's like 6 of us. And with the numbers I showed earlier, it tells you we're like nothing in that, the group of people that need interpreting. I mean, so, and they don't, the agencies don't tell us about the work, the Code of Ethics of California. Nobody trains us on that. And we didn't even know it exists. And again, I only know that it exists is because I've gone to school now, and I know now it pays. and so the Spanish and English is that one, just speaking 2 languages. And again, and they come from working class, and all the structural impediments of, like, we don't know this system. That's the honest truth. We do not know. I felt very challenged earlier when I was in a coffee shop, and this gentleman told me something in French. And I looked at him and I said, "I'm sorry, I don't understand." And all he told me was my backpack was open. So can you imagine what does my community feel like when they come to a place we don't speak none of the languages? I was able to respond in English, but imagine not speaking Spanish or English. So those are the challenges that we're facing. And it's really hard to get interpreters, and Miss Skye mentioned it earlier. We come from rural areas, even in California. We have to take a day off of regular work to be able to go interpret. So we're not going to invest that amount of money to study and research if, in the case of my Zapoteco, it only comes once in a blue moon that I'm needed in that language. So I'm not going to spend the time studying and thinking if I'm going to get a job once a year, right? So that's the situation of a lot of the indigenous interpreters, because in the case of Zapoteco, there's so many variants. We don't have an exact numbers. The Mexican government says it's over 70. We think, again, that is not from a trustworthy source, so it could be more. So my husband and I are both Zapotecs. We cannot have a conversation in Zapoteco. and this is so serious. We cannot have a conversation in Zapoteco. So
do you try?
We've tried. We've tried, but the one thing that has been very helpful with him is that he came to the U.S. at a later age and grew up with the community, with the elders. So when I say, "Hey, how will we think of judge? Like, what do you suggest?" And he will say, "Well, it will be, I would say, the honorable man." Then yes, it comes back to that, right? And then, but then I have the honorable man in black. because then you have the DA and you have the public defender, so you have to describe every detail of what they do instead of saying the DA, the public defender, and the judge, right? You have to describe the role of each one of them. So I'll talk about more about what we're doing. So in our case, most of the interpreters, I already talked about this, and it's a member of the community, and that becomes a challenge too, because if I'm a member of the community of the Zapote of Sogocho, I always want people to find out if I have a domestic violence issue or I have a drinking issue, So they will most likely say, oh, I don't need an interpreter. So, or people will notice that their communicating is not making sense. So that's one. And it's usually a member of the community, a member of the family, some friends that will interpret for you. And that becomes a conflict of interest, and it becomes a conflict of concept. And we've learned in our organization, we've learned to be very transparent with that. Like whatever happened here, if I find you in a community event, I never saw you here. That's it. And because we're running to them, there are rules like you never exchange numbers with the defendant or with the detainee, never. You don't talk to them. Well, in our case, that doesn't happen that way, because they already know who my grandma is, who my dad, who my ancestors are, and they're going to find me, and they've found me. And there's rule like you don't take money, you don't take any presents. I moved 3 times, but they always find out where I live. And the last thing that they brought me was a chicken to my parents' house. They brought me a chicken, as a gratitude. Like they thought I helped them, but I only did my job as interpreting and didn't say anything to the community. And my mom's like, hey, they dropped off a chicken for you. And I go, oh, okay, I don't know how to cut a chicken. But it's so sacred, These type of gifts are so sacred. So these are the rules that kind of have a conflict with our worldview, but we're getting around them, like making sure that the community feels safe as an organization. Like we tell them, like, if I see you at the next Patron Saint event, we could eat, we could dance, just like normal community members, but don't be worried. This information that happened here only stays. And I think we've created an amazing reputation for that, so people now do come to my organization for an interpreter, but it took us a while. And in the case of Oaxaca and other places, an enemy could become an interpreter, because a lot of these agencies just get anyone without taking into account the political, the armed conflict, the land conflict in the community. And I'm always worried when they have a certain community of Oaxaca, and did you ask them? But they wouldn't know. They wouldn't know what group belongs to who, so they're just sending someone there. So that could also be some of the challenges that we face too. Like, you never know who's going to interpret for you. It could be even an enemy. And it happened with one of the trained interpreters from Mexico in one of the languages. We did a conference call, and the interpreter, doctor talked. I interpret because I was a Spanish-English interpreter. And then there's a silence. I asked the interpreter, can you relay the message? And then he does, and then he takes forever. And I said, well, that's too long. And I would ask the interpreter, can you relay the message? Oh, well, she was asking me what community I come from, what family. And of course, I had to pause and say, you just have to relate the message that the doctor said, nothing else. Oh, it's because she wanted to know. So he goes on to tell his life story. What happens is that this family runs out of the office because it was a community that is in conflict. So she didn't feel safe. She ran out of the office. The doctor's office, and that was talking about a transport. So these things, these are some that, like I told you, we have a crisis. So this is just to illustrate some of the challenges that we face. But, and our interpreters, community members, they're farm workers, cultural ambassadors. We have a little bit of everything. everyone becoming an interpreter nowadays. And and I wanted to show this. This is my community jail. So it's very plain, and you never want to get in there, you know, because everybody will know, and you'll be an embarrassment to your family. And you never want to. In the case of LA, we organize just the way we do back home. So we're rarely into the court system. As far as my community, we've been in the U.S. since the Bracero program. So we organize us, and we have a council of elders, and before we go to white men court, then we try to solve it within our community. And you don't want to go into that elders council because everybody will find out again. So the social pressure is still has an impact in our life in LA, like 50 years after, well, 70 years after. And everybody will know, like if I take a chicken, it's still a chicken, I have to give it back or do some community work, and that's as far as it goes, right? But, and of course, then, okay, because I'm not gonna use and we call jail La Casa de Metal, the metal house. And this metal house is a real metal house, right? So here, no one, or an iron house, no one speaks the language, the food is unknown, the guards are carrying weapons. In my community, we don't carry weapons. The most powerful weapon we have is a whistle. And with that, and you don't become like an authority until probably at the age of 40. So, of course, now that has changed a lot with migration, right? Because most of us are here, and there's like a few young kids left back home, and now the roles are changing. But just to illustrate like the difference between the jails and the process, so imagine not being able to speak your language and not understanding this whole new system. And some of the things you're probably wondering about, why don't you stay back home, right? Why are you coming to the U.S.? Is that your question? You could ask. At this point, I no longer take those kinds of it. I'm going to say it because we're in Canada, but Canada has a lot to do with it. Did you know that in the state of Oaxaca, 322 mines is owned by Canadian companies? 322. 26 in 35 municipalities is owned by one company only. And people are being pushed out. That's the bottom. In Guatemala, you know, the palm tree oils, we're being pushed out. It's not by choice that we come here. I didn't put a picture of my community, but it's a beautiful community. We are the people of the clouds. That's what we are literally called. And when you wake up, it's nice and beautiful. And the river that I mentioned that I'm the clan, my clan is no longer exists because they used it for the Natividad mining, and they kind of got rid of it. And it's also owned by a Canadian company. So we're being pushed out. The two forces that pushes us out is the US and Canada. Throughout Latin America. And I just gave you a number of Oaxaca, but you can go and Google the mines that are owned by Canadian and US companies and Spanish companies. Those are the people pushing us out. I mean, we really don't have a choice. And the war on drugs, of course, and NAFTA and the North American Free Trade Agreement was no benefit to us as indigenous people. As a matter of fact, it pushed us out. That's when my community personally became a ghost town. And a lot of the sector where I come from. So I don't know how much time do I have now.
10, 15 minutes.
Okay. And you know so this is usually a 4-hour workshop, but I'm gonna summarize it. And how can you be an ally as an interpreter? Is the biggest question, right? Like how can you help? Like people help with the policy, with educating, and opening up spaces for us like this symposium. Not only people from south of the border, but all natives, both in Canada and Mexico and the US. Because we are not represented in these circles of interpreters and translators. So that's very important. How can you be more inclusive of Indigenous interpreters? How can you provide, like if you interpret in medical, maybe you could create a glossary of medical with simple terms, and then the interpreter will be able to think about it, like say cholesterol. In English, it's cholesterol, but for us, it's fat in your blood. You know, how can you put it in those simple terms? When you run into an Indigenous interpreter, how can you be supportive? Because again, most of us do not have a formal education. We became an interpreter out of need, and a lot of these words will be unknown to us, and most of them will probably be borrowing terms from Spanish to make it sound like Zapotec. And you should be able to notice that. And if you do notice that, you know, you're not gonna be upset at the interpreter, because this is, but instead ask yourself, how do you work with this interpreter? Okay, let's review the word. If you don't, what is cholesterol? Oh, we don't have a word for cholesterol. How about fat in your blood? Oh, we could definitely say that, right? And if your interpreter says that there's not a yes and a no in an Indigenous languages, please be very suspicious and work with them. We're lately getting that there's no yes and no in Indigenous languages. And there is a way to say yes and no. You cannot go to the authority in your community and say, did you steal the chicken? And you're saying, or No, you respond in a very formal way. Yes, I did steal that chicken. Or no, I did not take that chicken. I found it on the road. But there's always a way to say no. But that's something that is like a trending thing right now, that interpreters are saying that there's no yes and no. And there is a way to, and I think there is a way to say things, knowing the etymology of the word, you will be able to deliver that message as an Indigenous interpreter. But again, take into account that these interpreters will not probably spend the time to study, because they have to work. They're farm workers. They have to take care of their kids. Some of them have 2 or 3 jobs. So that so try to work with them and say, oh, let's work with this word. This is what it means in simple, plain language, right? So I think that's one of the things that we would ask for you. Volunteer if you have the time with Indigenous organizations or nations at an equal level. Like, hey, I'm here to support. Like, how can we develop this dictionary? How can we develop the meanings of these words? So when you become an interpreter, or when you go to the Canadian Parliament, you're able to deliver that message properly, right? So those are some of the things that we are doing. And I always have this, because don't use, this doesn't make sense to us in our language, because in our intellect. No. So that's idiomatic expressions do not go well with us. We already talked about this. And you know, educate the agency. Like, it's not so easy to interpret, because they are a problem currently. Agencies are a problem for us, because they are hiring people left and right at a very low price, but also creating a lot of problems for the detainees and families. And so I will send this to Bill, and he could share it with all of you, like the best practices we develop. And I know everything sounds so tragic, but here's some a list of Indigenous organizations that you should be working with that are at the forefront. Mine's been the first one that we trained the first interpreters in 1996, and the first Mexican interpreters that were mostly from the state of Oaxaca and Purépechas and Mixteco from Guerrero and Puebla. They're still working today. Some of them have become very pretty and created their own agency and are powerful currently. Along with California Rural Legal Assistance, and we continue doing the training on this side of the country. I'm thinking I'm in the US. The Mayan League is in DC. We've also been training their interpreters. So I will also send this to Bill, so you will have, if you ever have an issue. Oh wait.
What's the last one?
Oh, well, I wanted to share our beautiful flyers of our second annual Indigenous Interpreting Conference. And I also wanted, I know it sounds very chaotic, that we're in a crisis, but we're also looking for solutions. We're working on a beautiful app that with the solidarity of many Spanish English interpreters, doctors, lawyers, police officers, that we've developed this app now that say, these are your Miranda rights. Like, what does it mean? What does 3 strikes mean? So in a very plain and simple, and we've given them like an idea, this is how you would say it. You make mistake 3 times and you will probably be in jail the rest of your life. That it could be said instead of 3 strikes. So we have that coming up. We are hoping to launch this app on February 21st. That's one. We've developed a few curriculums on law enforcement, immigration, medical, that we're working with our communities. And what we do is we bring an expert, let's say a police officer, they talk about the process of detaining a person. And from there, we develop a vocabulary with the community, with the community, the elders of the community, but also with the trilingual interpreters. And we have an amazing doctor. Her name is Silvia Ventura Luna. She has a PhD in anthropology, but she's also a Mixteca. And we're working very closely with her to, like, are we putting this concept in properly? Are we working? So it's a community work. So in December, we're going to have a meeting with one of the top Mexican linguists, Yasnaya Aguilar, just to kind of go over, like, to see if we, living in the U.S., put this concept accurately to be understood. So hopefully we'll be able to share that on our social media, that you can follow us there. And we're also like doing a lot of language revitalization. We're teaching, my generation was the last one who spoke my Zapoteco from Sogocho. I didn't teach it to my daughter because the encounter with the Mexicans was just really traumatic. But my granddaughter is relearning it. So there's this whole generation of Zapotecs born in LA, relearning the language. We have an annual literature conference in different indigenous languages. We also have Weaving Words and Rhymes, which is also rap, hip hop in indigenous languages, along with traditional dances, and also a newer version of dancing of expressing in indigenous languages. And then we do it in sometimes we invite rappers from the US, like Superman, along with rappers from the South. So it's like a very beautiful experience from northern, the US tribes and the southern tribes. And then our conference, so far we have registered 50 indigenous interpreters that have registered to come to this conference in December. And, we're going to talk about ethics. How do we deal with this issue of ethics, and also some of the challenges that we're now facing, because, we live in a capitalist society and we love it too, right? And some of these interpreters have become very unethical as far as threatening the community. Like, if you say that you did not understand my Mixteco, they're going to remove your children. So we're going to really have a serious conversation with them that this cannot be done. Not over money. Sure, like, we're very comfortable being an interpreter, pays very well, but not over indigenous people's life and children's life. So we're going to have that conversation. So I'm open to questions. Anything I missed?
Sorry, I just want to applaud you for bringing this here and for sharing your work, and thinking about the presentation from the morning of how do you scaffold and build bridges, between, like in Canada, we started with the conversation about how do you get to the point where you're providing simultaneous interpretation in an indigenous language. Well, these are the organizations who are training your interpreters, and where your interpreters are. They're in your community and in your advocacy organizations from the indigenous immigrant communities, nonprofits who have created communities and are now teaching and training. The Adelia's organization and that list of organizations that she showed, which are in California, that's where the expertise is. that's where the lessons learned are. That's where they are. And Canada has those organizations as well. So I just want to applaud you, but I would love to see those, you build those bridges between the conference interpreting and the area where the expertise is, and start scaffolding that skill set up and sharing the gifts that each area has with each other. So I just want to thank you so much for your presentation and encourage that kind of continued collaboration.
Oh, thank you, Catherine, and thank you for nominating me to be here. So I'm really excited and grateful. Yes.
Yes, my name is Nicole Bélanger. I was wondering if you feel the need for terminologists. I haven't heard you, you feel things have to be, concepts have to be named and in the right way, in the right language, but you never talk about terminologists.
Yes, we do need terminology,
Yeah.
someone that could work with us. I mean, that it's been challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been very lucky, like, for example, like one success story I failed to share today was with the Los Angeles Police Department.
Mm-hmm.
We tried to reach out with them to them for many, many years. But not until they killed a Mayan man for them, because they did not understand the commands when he was told to raise his hand and stop. They shot him. They shot him, and then they're like, "Hey, Olivia, can we have a conversation? Can you talk to the community?" And I said, "No, I'm not going to talk to the community until you commit to training your officers on cultural awareness on issues of indigenous migration. I will not have a conversation until you agree that we have to find a solution to this problem, because, LAPD has the largest populations of indigenous people, both from Mexico and Guatemala." So it became a very love and hate relationship. At one point, right now we're doing better. But it was very intense because Mexicans, again, were saying, "Well, what are you talking about? There's no Indians in Mexico. I'm from Puebla, and I've never heard of what you're talking about." And in front of 100 officers, he would stop me and say, "I'm from Puebla. There's no Indians." At one point, I was like, "Have you looked at yourself and your spiky hair? I mean, you look pretty Indian to me." And it would be like, but and we had all these people like from Sinaloa, because LAPD is made of people from northern Mexico, Jalisco, Michoacan, Sinaloa, like the first Mexican migrants to the U.S. So they're like, "No, I've never heard of such people." Like, so it got to the point like we had to show them the map. In Jalisco, there's this type of this group of indigenous people. In Sonora, there's this group of indigenous people. And finally, after this tremendous relationship, they have agreed to change their curriculum, and they're going to put from videos before they go on roll call to say, like, there's a diverse community. There's Mayans, there's Zapotec, there's Mijes in this neighborhood. So keep an eye for language barriers. And they will be carrying a card. It's a 3x5 that is in English phonetics, and it's asking, what do you speak Zapoteco, based on that division. So it's a lot of work. And also they're going to change their questionnaire and reports so they're able to document and create a data as far as the what languages or is indigenous populations are serving. And with them, they brought their experts on the terminology that they use, and that's how we develop this law enforcement. But that happened because they had to kill someone, and they had to kind of clean their image and be able to sit there and say, "I'm sitting with the Indians, we're having a conversation," But it's there. So we with them we had to use a specialist in their language. So yes, we definitely need terminologists. Yes.
As a follow-up to this, do you have collaborations with universities in California where students could do a master's or a doctorate, helping you, they could get funds?
We work with some universities currently with UCLA, but not on develop. We develop, one of the things that we've learned, my organization has been doing this training for many years. And 2 years ago, we said, no, this has to come from the community. It's very community-based because we spent a lot of money with the Monterey Institute, hiring top Spanish, English interpreters, but we weren't getting anywhere. We were not getting to like the roots of the problem, like how do we say this, or how do we, so we started working with the first generation of trilinguals going to the university. Let's work on this. You live in this Western world, but also in this community. Let's work on this. So it's very community driven, very community based. And one of our goals is like, these movements have to be led by indigenous people, and so with a lot of allies. And that's what we found.
We're gonna have to stop, and sorry, because,
I was the first one to raise my hand, and everybody.
okay, let's take the last question.
In the Trump's era, where does the money come from? Your organization must be thriving to survive.
Oh, that I failed to tell you too that my organization is volunteer based. It's based on the concept of tequio, which means that community work for the benefit of all. So I traveled here today, I lost a day of work. I was in Tijuana on Thursday, I lost 2 days of work. This is really volunteer based for the benefit of all. The only person that's giving us money this year is the Oaxacan government for the very first time for our conference, very first time. So we're really excited about that, but we're not getting paid out of that. We're getting all the interpreters flying them in, paying the space and everything, but it's volunteer based. Trump doesn't affect it.
So now, Jost Zetschi will be our next speaker. Jost is, Jost is a German-English translator, but many more things, a PhD in Chinese studies and an expert on language technology. He leads the Jeromabot Twitter feed, which I highly recommend, and one of our deepest thinkers about language technology, actually. He's also worked a good bit, as it turns out, in First Nations languages. So, Jost.
Thank you. Nobody asked what language do you and your husband speak?
Zapotec.
No, you don't. You said don't speak Zapotec with your husband.
Oh, we speak English or Spanish. I know.
It was a burning question, I thought.
And sometimes we don't even understand each other in those two languages.
So I was gonna, I negotiated 33 minutes. So we're gonna be, we'll try to go through it very quickly. I'm gonna show you something really different. It has to do with indigenous language. Clearly, that's why I'm here. But you'll be, I think, a little confused and surprised with what I'm gonna show you. I'm showing you this because I think I have a desire to show you that, because I also would like your feedback. Now, I realize that we won't have much time in here to gather feedback because of time constraints, but we, of course, can talk over lunch and in the afternoon, etc. I'm going to talk to you about a tool or a project called Translation Insights and Perspectives. Before I start to talk about it, I would like to read a quote to you that we, in a way, heard this morning already. You talked about being washed with soap when you spoke your native language. This is a quote here where Reddy Fred, who is an elder of the Nulchat-Nult tribe in Western Canada, his father actually had needles pushed to his tongue every time he spoke his language. And I read, I in preparation for this conference, I knew I was going to come to this conference for a few months, and so I've been reading quite a bit about residential schools and the treatment that First Nations people had to suffer there. And this is not the cruelest, but in its cruelty, the most appropriate maybe for this conference here, I felt. Tongues is an image for language, of course, when speaking, and they obviously were cruelly killed in a truest sense, because this particular, so he speaks Nulchat-Nult, or Sechat is a dialect of that, and that language is about to die. I think there's 1 or 2 people who speak that language still, because his father did not teach Randy Fred that language because it was so deeply ingrained that he could not teach that language.
Yes, I'm going to you need to stand a little bit right behind the podium so that we can get you and the slides in the same shot.
Is it my height?
I didn't bring it up.
It's always my height. I'm sorry.
You can't walk around and talk.
Really hard. So what do I want to do here with my presentation? I want to do three things. I want to show you, and I hope that I will show you that eventually, that we all can deeply and very personally benefit from indigenous languages. And that's sort of a different paradigm. I think we often don't talk about it. People are not good. People are very selfish. We all are very selfish, and we need to be shown how we can personally benefit from something to do good. There's a climate change, we need to do something with that. Animals are dying, and now languages are dying also. So much to do, I can't do everything, so I'm just not going to do anything. That's typically the response, right? Unless I have an immediate and direct benefit from it. And that's what I'm going to show you, I think, with this project, what could be done there. I also want to show, and of course that's kind of presumptuous because I'm not indigenous, that a way how you can, I think, build pride in indigenous languages through what I'm going to show you with this project. And lastly, I also want to show that we are, I think, all indebted to each other, indigenous or not. We are all indebted to each other by the languages that we speak and by the languages that we can share. So, this is kind of the preface. Now, about 5 years ago, I imagined something. I imagined what it would be like if you would have a tool or a project that would look at a text that has been translated into 3,000 different languages. 3,000 different languages, one text or one set of texts that has been translated to 3,000 languages. And what about if you can then use those 3,000 different languages to look back at the text again? So translation, that's kind of translation sort of turned upside down and then like that or something. Translation typically is like that. Translation, typically somebody wants translation. Party A is the customer or the person who wants to translate a book or wants to translate documents or needs interpreting in court or with a doctor. And there is the B that translation needs to happen for, and then typically a translator comes up and helps with that translation. And the hope is that B then comes back to A and buys the book, buys the product, buys the medical service or the legal service, whatever. And maybe there's actually a relationship built between A and B. That's the ultimate goal, if that indeed happens. What I imagined in my project that I sort of envisioned was something like that. I imagined a translation is happening from A to B, but then that translation is coming back to A. So not only B benefits in a way immediately from the translation, but A, the party that initiated the translation, also benefits from it, not by selling services, but by looking at the translation again. And if you imagine that happening 3 times, 1,000 times, that's sort of what a 3,000 dimensional translation would look like. This is the tool that I eventually was able to start. And this is the URL. I'm not going to give you a live demo here. I was going to, it's live and you can go there and look at the tool and look at all the things that I'm going to show you. Because of technical difficulties, we felt it was safer not for me to do a demo aside from the PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to give you some screenshots here of what the tool looks like. Translation Insights and Perspectives is a tool for which I eventually found a sponsor in United Bible Societies. United Bible Society is sort of like FIT, but a little bit more, I think, in a sense that United Bible Societies is the umbrella organization for all the national Bible associations like Canadian Bible Society, American Bible Society, German Bible Society, etc., etc. And but it's also the executive arm, so it provides tools and provides expertise to ongoing translation projects, or and they finally, I shot this idea for about 2 years, and they finally agreed to sponsor me with that. So they actually pay me to build this tool now, and it's a United Bible Societies tool now. But they've also given me an advisory committee of 7 now very experienced translation consultants. Translation consultants are people who are not actually translating, are helping typically indigenous communities with teaching them tools and processes to be able to translate the Bible in this case. They also give me a programmer. The programmer is very skilled. He's also a programmer, which I think often means that communication is really hard sometimes, but we manage, sort of. You know, I'm a little technical myself, so I think I can speak some of this language, not all of it, unfortunately. But he is, I think, quite good. I've been working on this for about 3 years, and it's a really preliminary product. But though it is preliminary, no, let me put it differently. Preliminary, I think, will be sort of an attribute that we will talk about, or that we will use for this tool that I'm going to show you in a second, forever. The idea is that this is a non-ending tool. It's a data collection facility, and the data collection is going to continue on at an indefinite and an undefined basis. It'll always be preliminary in that sense. Still, we do have about 2,000 stories in this tool. We talk about 500 different languages. When I say 2,000 stories, what I mean by that is sometimes those are really full-fledged stories with a beginning and an end and a story arc, and we discuss the translation and you know, description of that, and we cited this and cited that. But often it's just a very short telling of how a certain phrase or a term or grammatical concept is translated into another language, and that story then that is being told in English, so it's understandable by language A essentially again. And we'll show some of those to make you understand what I mean by that. This obviously is an event organized by Fit North America. So these are, I said there's about 500 different languages that we have covered. These are all the North American languages that we have covered. We have a couple of subtexts, I think, and you will see then that there is only a fairly limited number of Canadian languages. Why is that? Well, this is why. This is a world map here, as you can see, and you can see those little dots. Those are all Bible translations. These are the complete Bible, and those are the green dots, or you have the New Testament, which are the red dots, or the orange and the blue are then portions of the Bible. And you can see that there's I love this map because there's like a belt around the world, right? I mean, you can clearly see it. This is where, and of course the super center is of course Papua New Guinea, always Papua New Guinea. That's where stuff happens. That's where really many languages are spoken. And then you see Canada, for instance, and Canada does have, you know, some translations, but compared to southern Mexico, for instance, right here, you know, not particularly. But we will look at some of the Canadian examples as we go through it. So this is what's going to be live. Again, we didn't do it live because of technical constraints. This is what the website looks like. Again, very easy to remember. Website address, tips.translation.bible. Strange, but easy to remember. And you can see here that it's a super easy to use interface. The most important part of the interface really is to find stories. That's how you can locate the data in the tool. You can also submit data, but that's likely not to be so interesting for you. So you can find stories by looking at verses. You can also look at terms or phrases or attributes as a grammatical list that you find here, and it's the English term. English is used as a reference language, not as the language from which translation was happening. The translation, of course, happened from Greek or Hebrew, so the reference term in English is listed, and then the Greek or Hebrew that was actually being translated into this language afterwards. But if you go to the verses section, you will see all the different books of the Bible. Whether you are familiar with them or not doesn't really matter. And let's imagine that you are, and this is only to show you what the tool contains. Let's imagine that you are interested in looking up a specific verse in the Bible. You go to Mark. You know, Mark was down here. You can see Mark's in the New Testament. It's right here. And you go to Mark, and then you choose, say, by the way, you So this is the 11th chapter of Mark, and then you have all the verses listed. You see not all verses are listed. You have 1 and 2, but then some are missing, and then 6 and 7. That's because only those verses by Mark are listed that contain stories, that have data associated, right? If I don't have anything on 11.3 or 11.4, 11.5, no data, no mentioning of Mark. Let's go to Mark 11.25. So you click on Mark 11.25 down here, and then you see something like this. So you see the Greek original, in that case, is New Testament, so it's Greek on the left-hand side, followed by an English reference text. And then you can see that here there's about 12 or 9 different stories that are all related to that particular verse, right? The words and the phrases and the grammatical features of that verse are then being discussed, if you will, in those stories here. If you look at the first one, for instance, that's one of those short stories, right? It's a story about how a Nepalese language, Western Parvat translates the concept of to hold a grudge against someone. And the way they translate it, back translated into English, is to have someone strung up in your heart. Oh, and you go like, oh, of course, that's what it is, right? So you hear that, and you don't have to have much explanation, but you get it. It makes sense. And suddenly you hear that, and your own concept of something that's kind of hard to deal with, because we all have somebody hold grudge against someone. Yes, he's actually, or she's actually strung up my heart. My heart is handicapped because of it. And you can see that if you hold your cursor on the title here, I know I'm moving, but Alan, I can't help it. Alan is watching me the whole time. You can see that if you put your cursor on the title here, the Greek or the Greek and Hebrew text of that particular phrase then appears for, if you are interested in that. But if you scroll down then you come to something like forgive or forgiveness. Yeah, you can imagine that that's a really big thing, right? To forgive. I mean, every language deals with that, and there is typically no ready-made term, or very interesting made ready terms in different languages. And you can see there's a lot of languages listed. If you will scroll down, it goes quite a bit further. And because there are so many languages listed in that case, what we do there is we also give a link to a graphic. And you can see the graphic then, and you can see on the left-hand side you have the Greek and Hebrew that is being translated. On the right-hand side, you have all the different ways that indigenous and other languages translate a term like forgiveness, right? And now, whether you're Christian or not, I don't really care, but forgiveness is important for all of us, right? I mean, we all need to forgive someone, unfortunately. And by reading this and looking through this, you will find out about, your concept of this difficult, or the approach that you have to this difficult concept is going to enlarge, is going to be richer by reading how languages that you didn't actually know existed beforehand. If you read through some of those language names, many you will know, most of them you will never have heard of, right? But because that maybe very small indigenous language has an approach to say, forgiving somebody is to be released or to be freed. Forgiving somebody is erasing my evil heart. That is meaningful, even for us. Even if we don't speak the language, we might never have met and will never meet somebody from that language, but the way they approach that language that concept is meaningful. Now, like I said, often you don't know where those languages are. You can see that all the languages are underlined, meaning there's a hyperlink, and you can go there, you can click on the link, and then you have a filter applied that lists all the different stories associated with that language. And then you have on the left-hand side, because you truly don't know possibly, that one you might know where Inupiaq is spoken, but many of those languages, again, it'll be 3,000 languages eventually. Right now it's only 500. You don't know. So you can click on the Wikipedia link, for instance, and you can see where that language is spoken, what that language is, etc. This actually is not Canadian, but it's Alaskan, with some folks in Canada also. And you have that other link to go back here. You see the Inupiaq Bible online. There you have, and that's not particularly helpful in the sense that you likely will read this Bible online because you can't read it most likely, but at least it makes it more, what's the word? More tangible, that they actually, you can see there is actually something. We're not making stuff up as we go along. So, what can we learn from a tool like this? Okay, drink some water. Sorry. Or coffee. So, what can we learn from a tool like this? Well, we can learn. I'm just going to give you some random examples that I think are just really interesting. What I have learned from languages, about difference in languages by working on this tool. So we can learn about structural difference in languages. The thing that I most often encounter about collecting data is pronouns. That's crazy, right? You think pronouns, why pronouns? Pronouns are the, thank you so much, are the class of words that speak about the language. A pronoun is a word that relates to something else in that language. Right? It's for a noun. That's what a pronoun is. So pronouns are really, I think, the class of words that tell us most about other languages. It's crazy. It's really crazy, but it's true. I have a good half of the stories are about pronouns because they are so interesting. So this one, for instance, many languages and many I guess mostly indigenous languages, but also non-indigenous languages, differentiate between an inclusive and an exclusive first plural pronoun. So we, if I talk to her and I say, and you are listening, and I say to you, we are going out to for lunch. In French or in German or English or Spanish, we don't know what I'm talking about. We don't know whether I mean you, him, and me, or whether I mean just the two of us, right? Because we don't differentiate between inclusive and exclusive pronouns. Now, many languages do. It's really important. It's really freaky if the source text doesn't tell you. The source text, in this case in Greek and Hebrew, doesn't tell you because they don't have the differentiation, right? So what these languages have to do, every time a first-person plural pronoun is used, they have to figure out what the author actually meant without the author actually telling them. Right? So they have to look at the context and then make a good guess what the author told them. In Fijian, Fiji has three pronouns. So they have a pronoun for two people, for three people, and for many. Right? So this particular example here, this is from this is from a particular book in the New Testament, where the first sentence in that book is it's a letter, and the first sentence is, well, I and Silas and Timothy did this and that, right? That's Paul writing. So it's a guy referring to two other people. So the Fijian translation has to use that three people pronoun throughout that long letter. It's like 50 occurrences of that we or us or our appears in that document, and every time they have to use a trial, which is not a dual, but a form of a pronoun, which makes a huge difference in the text. You understand? I mean, that suddenly you read that text, and every time you read that trial rather than the dual or the plural, you're reminded, oh yes, that's right. Of course, it's those three talking. It's not just two or many. So this one here, this is actually an example from a Canadian lady from Chilcotin. So Chilcotin has the need to have objects much more frequently than we do. So you cannot say, I cut something. You cannot say, I cut branches. You cannot say, I cut branches without saying with what you cut those branches. You have to say, it was with an axe, it was with a knife, it was with a... But anytime, for instance, the term cut is used without specifying what the instrument was, they have to define what the instrument was. Well, the text doesn't tell you. So what the translators need to do is they need to study the culture of that time and figure out, well, how did they typically cut branches? And then from that study, make a. So what it does is that the text gets larger and larger by looking at how other languages translate and gets much more well-defined. Now, wouldn't it be great if let's say I'm a Christian, I am interested in that text, if I get all that information also, wouldn't that be great if I could benefit from how the Chilcotin translators translated that text, because they have the grammatical need and they had to have this really intense study on how they cut, and that's what it's about. Isn't that cool? Well, this one is, I love, this actually was the start of a project here. So in English or in Spanish or in all these languages, Hebrew, Greek, we say God is He, right? Too bad. I mean, that's obviously whether you're Christian or not, you don't believe that, right? That God is He. And maybe you might not believe in God, but even if you don't believe in God, you also will not believe that He's a guy. I mean, He is something else than a guy, right? We are bound to use a pronoun that defines the gender. We just don't have a pronoun that allows it. We could say it, we could say she, some do, but that's also very ill-defined. So Chinese is able to, a Chinese translator had the ingenious idea in 1930 to, as he was translating the Bible, after about 50, and literally 50 different Bible translations had already been executed in China, the 51st translator of a new Bible had the idea that, you know what, I'm going to make up a new pronoun. And because of the way that Chinese is structured, and it was only possible to do this in Chinese, I can tell you a little bit more, in more specifically, if you would like to afterwards. Only because of Chinese, the way that Chinese characters are structured, he was able to do it. And this is the pronoun for God in Chinese. So Chinese clearly have a different idea of God, because He is not a guy. He is not a girl. He is not a thing. He is only divine. This pronoun, this particular character is only used for God, for Spirit, and for Son, for the Trinity, right? Just for that, nothing else. How crazy is that? How much can we benefit from the fact that we know such a major language like Chinese is actually talking about God in a whole different ballpark, on a whole different level, a whole different dimension. We can understand. Well, I'm going to skip through it because time is running out, and I want to talk to you a little bit more about what we actually want to achieve that. But this is kind of interesting here. So this is something that many of the Canadian Indigenous languages do with it. And Chinese, for instance, do that also. We cannot say brother or sister in those languages, right? We often have to say older brother or younger brother, or older sister and younger sister. Well, the Bible doesn't tell us, because Hebrew and Greek doesn't do with that also, right? So they have to, again, do really complex studies. Who is Mary the older? Is Martha the older? Is Lazarus is in the mix there too? Somehow those three are brothers and sisters, and so they have to make those decisions. And what we are doing, we're just collecting data. So some translators make different decisions. So by collecting lots of data from lots of languages, we just kind of get an idea via this project how many, whether the majority of translations are going that way or this way, and what reasons do they have, if we possibly have access to that data also. Cool. So this is really interesting, I think. Of course, those are the really colorful stories, right? Kind of the stories that we all know. The stories where, because they don't have wolves or they don't have lambs, they switch to lambs with seals and blah, blah, blah. Those are cute stories, not particularly helpful, but sometimes they are. This is interesting, maybe particularly because Naskapi is a Canadian language, Canadian Indigenous language. They had to translate firmament, when it talks about that God created the firmament, and they didn't have a term for firmament, so they say like a caribou skin, right? So is that something that I can really learn something from? Maybe not, I don't know, but it's really interesting anyway that this language grew. And in this particular instance, I know that they worked on that for months and months and months. They wanted to find a word how to say firmament, and they finally then found this particular one. So what can we learn from this? what we can learn is that languages are not only of equal value, but they also have value for all of us. So Naskapi is not only of equal value to French or English or Greek and Hebrew, but the way that the Naskapi translators have translated something is actually of value for me also. So that then means, oh, yeah, and I want to show you a couple, let's skip that also. Oh, I do want to show you that again. So for instance, to show that languages truly are, we make efforts to show that languages truly are of equal value. So for instance, I showed you this before, this is the forgiveness chart here. There's many charts like that in the tool. You can see that we are also making a point to, for instance, list English as one of the languages there, because the word forgive comes from something also, right? There's a root for the word, and we list that also. So forgive in English means to give up desire, you know, to give up desire or power to punish. So that's where forgiveness comes from. And the reason why we do that is not because that might or might not be interesting, but we want to make sure that we communicate that English is just the same. It's all the same. They're all just languages. And languages are super capable, and English is just as capable as any of these other languages are there. So that means, if that is true what I just said, that we can all learn from all languages, that means, and this is really what it comes down to, that with every language that goes extinct, with every language that dies out, like so many languages have in Canada, so many languages have in the United States where I live, or so many languages everywhere die out all the time. Every 2 weeks, a language dies this century. Of course, there's a projection, but about that is going to happen, or is happening. That means that we lose our identity. It's not just that they lose their identity. Yes, I feel sorry for the people, you know, that where the language dies out, but that doesn't cut it. That's not good enough for selfish people like me or for you, right? I need a reason for myself to be interested in that. I mean, I'm of course over doing it a little bit here, but it's the truth. We need to have a reason for us to do something, otherwise we don't do it. But if I can show that because of these languages, because of how these languages approach something that I find interesting, and I can be richer by looking at how they approach that, that is a reason for me to fight for language survival, right there. So this is really what it's about. Really, I totally believe that. See, I looked up, this is a text that was published 2 days ago or 3 days ago. And it's really, there's many texts right now on the International Year of Indigenous Languages about why we need to fight for language survival. And they're all really good, and I really mean it, they're great. But they all kind of go along these lines. They say, well, they have accumulated wisdom in those languages. That's why we need to support them. And they have vital information about the environment, about the weather, about animals and plant species, etc. They have, they have human experience in a specific context, and we can't uproot a culture from its roots. Those are all pretty far out there. I mean, they don't really have to do with me. This has to do with me. And that's why I think this is such a powerful message in this Year of Indigenous Languages. And lastly, and again, this is where I kind of need to step back a little bit, but I hope and I imagine that if we can tell young kids, it's all about young kids in Indigenous languages, right? It's the young kids who need to learn Indigenous languages, otherwise it's going to die out. If we can, it's wonderful to hear that your young kids are learning Zapoteco again. Hooray. I mean it, it's wonderful, right? And it happens in many languages. But in many languages, it doesn't happen. In hundreds, maybe thousands of languages, it doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen because kids are not really interested. And their parents might not be interested either. But if the kids find out about this, if the kids find out that my language has a term or has a way to express something that my dominant language, maybe Spanish or English or Russian or Chinese, and where I live, cannot express, and neither can any other language, but just my language. That is a cool factor that I think might just be enough for language speakers, for young language speakers to convince their parents, but I do want to learn Lascaux, or I do want to learn XYZ language because it is cool. I can say something that no one else in this world can. And that's, again, I'm not indigenous, so I can't really say it, but I still hope that that might happen. And what do I want to show you this here? Oh, yeah. Oh, this is why I want to show you. So this here is a story, and the way we try to make that, and it's really, really hard to be really honest, but the way we try to make that happen is that so this is a story about how grace is being translated in a number of languages, and one of the languages is Inuktitut. You know, in Inuktitut, grace is translated as God, kindness enables us. You might be interested in that translation, not, doesn't matter. But we thought that was a really interesting story, so we actually translated it into Inuktitut also. And we do that sort of maybe as a, as something because we want to show something, but also because we want to show something. We want, Inuit kids to read that and go like, whoa, there is not only Inuktitut in this tool, but it tells me something about my language that no other language can do quite like that, or does quite like that. And that's something where we hope to push that cool factor maybe even a little bit more. So here's my question. We have about a minute and a half to talk about it in the plenum here. But if you have questions, maybe we have time for one question. But I would really, really love to hear your feedback. I clearly, maybe none of you is a Christian, but I don't really care. Again, what I'm trying to do, I do care. It'd be great if you all be Christians, but that's not my point here. My point is here that this is a unique situation. There's no text that is even close to being translated into so many languages. 3,000 languages, that's crazy, right? The next best is like the UN Declaration of Human Rights, it's like 360 languages. I mean, like 10, right? So we have this text that is so intensely translated and is actually getting more and more and more. I mean, there's, translations happening around the world still. And what a unique opportunity to do something like this to show the value of languages, of all languages, indigenous or not. And so if you have feedback,
we have 5 minutes.
5 minutes, whoa! This is like 5 minutes. Any questions or any hate mail? Whoa, oh, yeah.
I think you've convinced me that that's my only comment, but it's from my heart.
I really appreciate that. You know what touches me? So I gave this, I come from a rural area in Oregon. You don't even want to know what my area is like politically, right? 85% have voted for Trump in my little town. Terrible. I mean, just really shocking. I mean, you can't imagine. And so they're all they have no good education, drugs are a rampant problem, all terrible things you can imagine happen in my little town, 5,000 people, 4,160 people. And I showed this to my church. I go to church and we have about 300 people in that church, and I showed this to my church about 5 weeks ago. Since then, I know because the people tell me all the time, since then, let's say a third of those 300 people are going to that tool every few days and are dealing with languages that they didn't know existed before. They're finding out, suddenly their horizon is widened so much because they clearly are interested in the Bible and they're learning stuff about the Bible through those languages that they now will have an interest to defend. If now somebody comes up who is a Zapotec, let's say, and will introduce herself, they will, they might or might not know, but I mean, there is a good chance that they will appreciate it because they've learned something from languages like Zapotec before. How powerful. What a powerful idea, right? And this is really happening. I'm not making it up. This is a true story. They really are researching it all the time. I see it on my Google, analytics.
And just commenting on what you just said, it's a very powerful tool. When we started this movement of relearning the language with my organization, we did a tour throughout California, saying the importance of Mixteco and talking about Well, it's not about Abe Lincoln or whoever hero they have in the U.S., but you have Ocho Venado, Garras de Tigre. And, people were like, you guys are crazy. I don't know. What do we need this language for? It doesn't look good.
Exactly.
And now that we're having the literature conference, people are like, oh, wait.
Yeah.
And, I go around and I hear, I use public transportation in LA because traffic's so horrible. And I run every morning into a woman that she's like, oh, you are the daughter of such and such. And she speaks to me in Zapoteco. Wow. I follow you on social media and everything that you transmit through your literature conference. I didn't know that it could be done. Another woman said, hey, I didn't know that Mitla was real. We talk about it, like when we're going to die, we're going to go to this space of the spirits. She's like, I didn't even know that it actually existed until we heard it from your organization. I renamed my child in an indigenous name.
Oh, yeah? That's cool.
Right. So I'm really excited because in LA, you run into people. LA is very small, and the food industry is run by Zapotecs. So, you run there like, you're that lady that teaches the language, right? And they start talking to me, or they see Hablaos, that's from my region. Are you from that region? No, I just got it. I'm like, no, it's from my pueblo, so okay, it's okay for you to wear it. Things like that is happening in LA that I'm really excited because at one point we were like, is it even worth it? Like all this time on the road, going back and forth, doing a lottery card, creating animals. At one point when my mom's like, you're wasting your time, no one's interested. But I'm very excited because the kids are relearning, people are speaking the language, wearing the clothes. In LA, we have a huge event in City Hall. So we're really excited. We have the Oaxacan Heritage Month now, proudly.
That's great. And the nice thing is, so this is a success story. There's other success stories also, right?
There is.
So Hawaiian is a big success story. Maori is a big success story. So there are, and I think in the case of Maori, for instance, language of New Zealand, the case of Maori, I think the reason why Maori is having such an upswing right now is because of Google, Microsoft, and Apple. Whether they actually talk to each other or not, probably not, but they all, at some point, hired always the same Maorian, whatever. The same guy who speaks Maori and who is indigenous to come to Silicon Valley and Seattle and translate their programs for them. And so Maori is richly supported on the computer. Now, how cool is that? That's another cool thing, right? And I think that is one of the reasons why, in the case of Maori, there's many other reasons, but one of the reasons why kids want to learn Maori because they can use Microsoft PowerPoint and Windows and Google and Facebook in Maori, and it's cool, right? And so that's another story. So there is lots of ways to approach it, but this happens to be mine, and I don't know, that might work.
Very short comment. I find it amusing that in today's world, there's this reference here, which is the Bible, which is very well translated, etc., and the Microsoft language portal.
Yeah.
All the languages in the Bible.
Exactly.
And I think with that, it's time for lunch.